Ah, Switzerland. It's quite fitting that Vittorio would end up in Switzerland, considering it was his ancestors who founded the beautiful country.
Whose ancestral rule began in the area where today France, Italy, and Switzerland come together in the vicinity of Lake Geneva, and then gradually expanded over the Savoy dynasty's 1,000-year history into the modern Italian state. Today, the knights and dames of the Savoy orders are represented by over 40 national and regional delegations throughout the world. Worldwide administration of the orders is directed by the Prince as Grand Master and by the Grand Chancellor from their headquarters offices at the Chancellery in Geneva, Switzerland.
Although the exact history of Switzerland is a bit shady, and there is some speculation that the Knights Templars settled here. However, Swiss nobility and the House of Savoy were certainly an influence in the founding of this country. Now this is when a light bulb went off. What do all of these corporations and organizations have in common? They are all located in Switzerland. A neutral, peacekeeping country known for its banking secrecy, full of exiled monarchs and notorious criminals. This 2006 article explains how Geneva is the capital of globalization. According to the government department responsible for promoting Switzerland's image abroad, Geneva is a vital element in the country's international marketing strategy. We want to develop an image of a modern, forward-looking country rather than relying on stereotypes such as mountains and chocolates. Geneva is a perfect example for us. And to convince people, you only need to remind them that the World Wide Web was first developed at the nuclear research facility CERN in Geneva in the 90s. Geneva started to take on a new role as a testing ground for globalization issues. Every year, the World Economic Forum organizes a meeting of global leaders, business figures, politicians, and intellectuals in Switzerland. Switzerland is also the seat of the Guardian of the Free Market, the World Trade Organization, and its social counterpart, the International Labor Organization, as well as the World Intellectual Property Organization, which deals with trademarks for companies worldwide.
There is a single cohesive global public-private partnership that oversees the entire systems, and that's taken the form of global governance.
This is a laboratory for world governance. It is here that a new partnership is being forged between states, the private sector, and civil society.
The idea of compartmentalized hierarchical authority as a structure.
Geneva has become an international focal point for health issues. Switzerland needs to encourage these new collaborations between the private sector, NGOs, universities, and the state.
This can also be done politically. There is a political organisation, a policy organisation, I would say, called the Global Public-Private Partnership.
It should create a suitable working environment for the new bodies that emerge from these partnerships. And that's exactly what happened. Global governance.
A way of managing the whole of the world through a process called global governance.
Switzerland is also home to the Club of Rome. According to the Club of Rome website, Andre Hoffman is also on the board of trustees at the World Economic Forum and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
They've got a new idea, a new system, people have called that the New World Order or whatever, a new system that they want to sell to us. So how are they going to get us to believe in it?
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
The technological aspect of that is easy. You know, there are already AI algorithms on the earth that can manage just infinitely complex systems right down to the individual level.
Our bodies will be so high tech, we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
So it's not a problem to manage it, technologically speaking. Their problem is getting us to go along with it.
The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it?
So here we have the shareholder of the COVID test, gathering ideas from the Club of Rome, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House think tank, and many other shady organizations, and meeting with other heads of his family-owned company to then share these ideas as agenda contributors to the World Economic Forum in Davos, All the while, our FDA commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, was getting paid by these same guys, and even being advised by the head of regulatory policy at Roche in Washington, D.C. Now, the ideas gathered at the club and shared at the forum eventually become law. They eventually become public policy.
It's now time to turn this agreement into policies and action, into laws and budget lines.
The Club of Rome wrote an open letter to global leaders, urging them to implement the Planetary Emergency Declaration and Plan, which supports lockdowns and other measures to combat global warming and climate change. A quote, green reboot after the pandemic.
All 193 UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
But that's part of Agenda 21, which is a plan for the entire century. Sustainable Development Goals. When we realise what sustainable development is really about, we are going to go absolutely mental. There will be a push for a global revolution. Because people will realise, hang on, they're taking everything.
Presidents, prime ministers, and other high-level representatives from around the world gathered at the UN headquarters in New York for a high-level debate on achieving the SDGs.
This is a business model on a global scale.
As previously mentioned, even back in 2006, Switzerland was leading the way in creating the global public-private partnerships of today.
Global public-private partnership, which is a global, for want of an expression, new world order.
Like there has been a lot of kind of almost global level power centralized in Switzerland for hundreds of years.
Switzerland.
Something kind of clicked with me is with Switzerland and being a neutral state and all these international, I was like, whoa.
And no one talks about it ever. No one talks about Switzerland ever.
International banking and high finance.
My name is André Kudelski. I'm chairman and CEO of the Kudelski Group.
Mr. Kudelski is also on the steering committee for the Bilderberg Group.
I cannot comment on Bilderberg conference.
The secrecy surrounding the Bilderberg Group gives rise to conspiracy theories. Are you plotting a new world order?
Certainly not.
No? One world government?
What an idea.
They're also famously neutral,
which dictates that the country is not to be involved in armed conflicts between other states. However, they are armed in order to ensure internal security and promote peace.
First we're going to come destroy everything, but now, hey, come on, let's keep peace, huh? Yeah. Let's keep it peaceful, guys.
Please welcome newly appointed United Nations Messenger of Peace, Mr. Leonardo DiCaprio.
It's easy to sit on your high horse and to be all about peace and prosperity and common sense for the greater good when you have already taken what you need, you know? They came and took that shit. Then they were like, all right, now we got to stop making our hands dirty. We're no longer going to use a gun. We're going to start using fucking loans and investments and you know, banks.
The Switzerland of supranational organizations, the UN, the World Trade Organization.
The WHO, Gavi, the World Economic Forum, Davos, CERN.
Definitely, you're on to something. I mean, where's the Bank of International Settlements?
That was one of my questions for you.
The Bank of International Settlements is the central bank of central banks. So commercial banks, high street banks, they bank with a central bank. So in America, this would be done by a Federal Reserve Bank. In the UK, we've got the Bank of England. So the Bank of International Settlements is the central bank of central banks. And that is based in Basel in Switzerland.
There's levels to this shit, and they know there's levels to this shit, and they're playing a different game. They're playing a different game. They're playing at a different level, and they figured out that perception is so important. So they all wear suits. They're living in this country with all these mountains and nature, so it already kind of resembles like decency.
What would the world be without our famous Swiss cheese?
They just figured out, like, you know what? All we have to do is put on our suits every day, wear our Rolexes, you know, make sure that our hair is nice and slick, and just continue to commit our crimes on the highest level.
Now, this got me interested in learning more about how the government of Switzerland operates.
This is the temple
of politicians. Nobody is safe from the temptations of power.
The National Council of Switzerland is the largest house of the Swiss legislature. It has 200 members, and aside from its regular sessions in special situations such as political crises, wars, etc., they convene what they call extraordinary sessions. To date, there have been 8 extraordinary sessions, including the response to the Chernobyl incident, the financing of Swiss Air, which included the 1998 crash of Flight 111 and the stolen gold aboard. This crash was investigated by SAIC/Leidos, by the way.
Hurricane Katrina is not the only disaster this company has helped out on. SAIC also worked on the Swiss Air crash in Nova Scotia in 1998.
We were very much in the right place at the right time.
And other extraordinary sessions were for the 2008 financial crisis, and the last one convened was for the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this Council of 200 met on May 4th, 2020 to respond to the new global crisis. The Council of 200 were the legislative authorities in 4 Swiss cities, as well as in the independent Republic of Geneva prior to the French Revolution. Although the council in Geneva dates back to 1526, the councils were medieval in origin, and they sometimes contained as many as 300 members. Now, this sounded very familiar to me. The Committee of 300, written by Dr. John Coleman, was a book published in the early 90s warning us that the Club of Rome was part of a secret group of 300 whose goal is to create a one-world government. Now, while rereading this book during the pandemic, I noticed of all the big pharmaceutical companies to be mentioned, it was Roche. Not Johnson & Johnson, not Pfizer, one of the other popular names, no, Roche. Page 106. The trend in making huge profits out of drugs was carried over into the 1960s by such legal drug death merchants as Sandoz, the makers of LSD, and Hoffmann La Roche, manufacturers of Valium. The cost of the raw material and manufacturing of Valium to Hoffmann La Roche is only $3 per kilo. It is sold to their distributors for $20,000 per kilo. By the time it reaches the consumer, the price of Valium has risen to $50,000 per kilo. Hoffmann La Roche does the same thing with vitamin C, which costs them less than 1 cent a kilo to produce. It is sold for a profit of 10,000%. When a friend of mine blew the whistle on this criminal company, which had entered into a monopoly agreement with other producers in contravention of the European Economic Community laws, he was arrested on the Swiss-Italian border and hustled into prison. His wife was threatened by the Swiss police until she committed suicide. He lost his wife, his job, and his pension because he dared to disclose Hoffmann La Roche's secrets. The Swiss take their industrial espionage law very seriously. Remember this next time you see those lovely advertisements of Swiss ski slopes or beautiful watches, pristine mountains, and cuckoo clocks. That is not what Switzerland is about. It is about dirty multi-billion-dollar money laundering, which is carried out by major Swiss banking houses. It is about the Committee of 300 legal drug manufacturers. Switzerland is the committee's ultimate safe haven for money and protection of their bodies in times of global calamity. Now, I was actually able to figure out the name of this friend that Dr. Coleman was referring to. It was whistleblower Stanley Adams, who published a book entitled Roche versus Adams, which wasn't super easy to get my hands on. This book demonstrates how the Swiss government considers whistleblowing against big pharma giants like Roche an act of industrial espionage. And look who is currently part of the National Council of Switzerland, another member of the Hoffmann La Roche family. Roche and the Swiss government are one and the same. Stanley Adams was locked up at the Italian-Swiss border, and his wife committed suicide while he was imprisoned. A film was made based on his book. Now, the purpose of Stanley's whistleblowing was to expose illegal competition practices within Roche. Now, these practices have enormous implications on the entire planet. Roche is the largest manufacturer and distributor of vitamins in the world.
Vitamins. They come in a bunch of different forms. Soft gels, tablets, liquids. It's a giant industry on the rise that makes billions of dollars annually,
which directly affects the demand and prices of the global supply chain.
Global supply chain crisis is happening right now. It's an economic fallout from the pandemic. Supply chain crisis. Chain issues severely impact the distribution of goods on an international scale, and as we've seen, have a very visible effect here in the United States. Sharply higher prices for food and energy, but also cars, clothing.
Just to reiterate, Roche is a huge international corporation with an overwhelming amount of power and protection from the government, similar to that of an American biotech company called Leidos, who is also conducting clinical trials for COVID-19 therapeutics and in fact teamed up with Roche to work on technology advancements in sequencing cancer genes. Now, this is Nancy Roche, and this is her LinkedIn page. And I can't say for sure if Nancy is related to the Hoffman-LaRoche family, but she certainly has some interesting credentials to say the least. And Roche even worked on mRNA vaccines as early as 2016. And don't forget, Roche saw strong first quarter sales in COVID-19 tests. Roche receives decades of dividends for the Swiss aristocrats. The leader in biotechnology, cancer treatment, and diagnostics has had 28 consecutive years of dividend growth. And then I heard about the midazolam scandal happening in the UK involving the killing of elderly people in the Liverpool Pathway nursing homes.
The Liverpool Care Pathway, or LCP.
You produced a new documentary that's essentially about euthanasia during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's called The Good Death, Euthanasia in the UK.
Some patients were being put on the LCP without anyone giving permission. Some families only found out about it after a loved one had passed away.
They would put them on this drip, which would put them into basically a medically induced coma. And then through different protocols and legal loopholes and things like that, they would cut off their feeding and water, put them into a coma and let them starve and dehydrate to death.
There were reports of treatments being removed too quickly. Some families said their loved ones had been left without food or water.
I was bathing her head, wetting her lips, and she opened her eyes and she looked at me and said, "I'm hungry." So at this point, I was really, emotional.
There was a conversation between Health Minister Matt Hancock and Conservative MP Dr. Luke Evans.
A good death needs three things. It needs equipment, it needs medication, and it needs the staff to administer it. So in terms of equipment, a few quick questions. Do you have enough syringe drivers in the NHS to deliver medications to keep people comfortable when they're passing away? Yes, we do.
And they're very openly discussing how best to give patients a, quote, good death.
With that, that's the syringe drivers deliver medication, particularly things like midazolam and morphine. Do you have any precautions put in place to make sure we have enough of those medications to be delivered? Yes.
And they're talking about what equipment, medications, and what staff they need to administer that good death.
Midazolam and morphine.
And so in March 2020, before the lockdowns really happened, the UK ordered vast record amounts of a drug called midazolam.
The orders for this in the community increased by 2,000% during the pseudo-pandemic.
Got documents showing the dosage of midazolam that was recommended for COVID patients. I've got a document showing how to manage breathlessness in patients by using midazolam.
It causes the symptoms that you would say were caused by COVID. It depresses the respiratory system.
Why would you give a medication that suppresses the respiratory system for a respiratory disease? Why would you give it to a person with a respiratory disease? It makes no sense.
It's a benzodiazepine, which is in the same family as Valium, Xanax.
It's an end-of-life drug as well.
It's also used in lethal injections, or was used at least in lethal injections in the United States.
This one is called midazolam, and in 3 executions, there might have been some problems with it, gasping or snorting or making choking sounds, and at least in 1 execution that the inmate was actually speaking.
I thought I might be able to guess whose drugs were being used in the midazolam scandal.
I'd be fascinated if it was Roche.
Who is the creator of midazolam?
That was originally created by Roche Pharmaceuticals, who obviously you're very familiar with.
Roche.
And it is Roche.
Now, my friend Cliché Garvera started covering this scandal, and the researcher that was involved was found dead.
Exposing the mistreatment of elderly in care homes.
It was basically a death sentence. If you went to the hospital, they'd put you on remdesivir and put you on a ventilator, and then you had like a 90% chance of dying. And that was the American version of the UK protocol. And remdesivir is also a Roche pharmaceutical product.
Remdesivir and how useful it's been. 3 IV treatments. You have to be in a hospital setting. If you're not all that sick, that may not sound very appealing.
Remdesivir has been an active antiviral. Pfizer has a drug in advanced development, the company I'm on the board of. There is a drug in advanced development a little further behind by Roche.
Guess which big pharma company spends the most on television advertising? Yep, according to this study, Roche has been ramping up advertising efforts. Roche's commercial spending sits at absolute top of this list, having spent $20 million more in November than the number 2 spot. They love investing with other philanthropists and especially love when they get all the blame for their crimes.
We put together a list of the top corporate criminals of the 1990s. We went back and looked at and paid $8.5 million, was guilty of environmental violations. Pfizer, the drug manufacturer, was guilty of antitrust violations and paid $20 million of food and drug regulatory violations. Sears was guilty of financial fraud. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois. Unical was guilty of fraud, environmental violations. $4 million. Georgia Korean Airlines, guilty of $5 million. It paid $250,000. Hoffman LaRoche, guilty of an antitrust violation, paid $500 million in criminal fines.
The people in charge at Roche are also in charge of an organization that specializes in disrupting financial systems on purpose, something they claim is healthy for the economy. System IQ, which took me a long time to find their website until I realized it was onpurpose.org, because again, they specialize in disrupting your financial system on purpose.
So stakeholder capitalism is at the heart of the new global international monetary and financial system. Stakeholder capitalism metrics are going to be a way of asset rating everything. So everything will have a sustainable asset rating based upon stakeholder capitalism metrics, which is decreed by the World Economic Forum.
The Hoffman-LaRoche family is so powerful, they even have members working in the government of Switzerland. And as demonstrated by Roche versus Adams, going against Roche is like going against the state of Switzerland. The Swiss government and Roche have a tight relationship. And these Alps are home to the wealthiest, most dangerous criminal elites in the world.
I just feel like they are the biggest criminals on planet Earth. They're not all criminals, but you just have this like white-collar crime.
We have to deal with the evolving natures of conflict, the impact of organized crime.
By the 19th century, the British East India Company built vast opium factories. By 1839, opium was the world's most traded commodity. In time, opium developed as a prescription drug. The Merck Company launched a product called morphine. Bayer introduced a cough suppressant called heroin. The U.S. made heroin illegal, creating a new global crime business dominated by the Italian mafia.
Now there's an epidemic, a Middle Eastern opiate. The CIA imported all these opiates and sold me it. Oxycontin, now the Roxy's gotta move to heroin. That mixed with fluoride and water in your American.
Quote, unfortunately, the drug economy is not a parallel economy to the legitimate one, but an integrated one. Money laundering has now become part of the oxygen of the legal economy.
The terrible truth is that the business of criminal cartels and pharmaceutical companies is connected. Together, they generate $100 billion of income a year,
The Pizza Connection was a drug cartel of Italian mafia members who bought large batches of morphine in Switzerland and transported it to illegal heroin refineries in Italy before trafficking it to the US and other countries. According to the anti-mafia organization, these investigations allow us to understand that there is one single organization with multiple ramifications which occupies an operational and financial circuit that involves countries from all over the world. From Thailand and India, the suppliers of heroin and hashish, to Turkey and Lebanon, suppliers of basic morphine. Then from Italy to the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Switzerland.
Big Pharma turned to the mass manufacture of other opium products like morphine and oxycodone and learned how to mechanize the process. They created a demand for narcotics, addicting millions of men, women, and children, which in turn fueled the illegal drug trade. From pill mills to heroin dealers to illegal fentanyl factories.
This complex association involves different groups of people who work together synergistically. Their business, managed by organized crime, has a fundamental base in Italy, where opioids from the Middle East are refined and where the proceeds of the sales of the finished product made in the United States fall. The point of convergence? Switzerland.
How does a country obtain this power where they're able to just be like, you know what, European Union, nah, we're good. You know what, bank transparency, nah, we're good.
The Bank of Italy reported over 110,000 suspicious transactions in its anti-money laundering 2020 report. And how do criminals hide their money?
The old trope of having a Swiss bank account.
They literally constructed a system that allows them to take in any amount of money.
They did a hilarious illustration of that in The Wolf of Wall Street.
Swiss custom requires 10 minutes of blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
If the US Justice Department sent us a subpoena, it would become papier toilette. We would wipe our ass with it.
we're gonna take in all the money from all the criminals, all the fucking drug lords from fucking anywhere with their private jets, no EU restrictions, no nada. They're gonna come stack all the gold.
Account number 651, Swiss credit. $1,785,000 flowed into that account in just 1 month. Dirty money. Ready to launder. Money that organized crime families sent to Switzerland while waiting for new investment opportunities. Now here we are, back on the lake. It is just the kind of setting that you would expect for the scion of one of Switzerland's greatest family dynasties.
Family businesses have as a characteristic that they go from generation to generation. When the company takes a decision today, it will influence the 5th generation and perhaps also the 6th after the 5th, etc., etc. So the business thinking has to be transgenerational. So the concept of sustainability, which is so much in favor at the moment, I'm glad to say, is lived by the family.
Through nepotism, they were born to it. These people traditionally are the world's greatest exponents of economic exploitation, worker enslavement, slave labour, usury, theft. That's why in the book I've spoken about these people, and I've said it in very deliberately disparaging terms. I've called them the parasite class.
Yeah, not the elite.
Not the elite. Because they're not geniuses. They're not particularly gifted or have any kind of fantastic technical expertise or anything like that. They're just immensely wealthy, immensely powerful, and they are steeped in eugenics. They believe this with a passion.
To control human reproduction, known as eugenics.
What is the bearing of the laws of heredity upon human affairs? Eugenics provides the answer.
There are certain among them that are steeped in the idea of eugenics, which means they've assumed the right to be in charge, that, you know, it's only right and proper that we're in charge of everything. That's the way it should be. They actually think like this, and they actually write about it and speak about it and give speeches and press conferences and hold meetings. You know, they write, Davos, and the Munich Security Conference.
Davos is some sort of secret underground cult, right?
Davos is not some secret underground cult. Next.
Nice.
On page 12, you talk about forming the inner ring and the informed influencers that surround and protect the core conspirators.
What I'm referring to there is the Society of the Elect, which goes back to the Rhodes Seventh Will and the foundation of the Round Table movement.
Committee of 300 calling shots close to home, tapping in your mobile phones, matching up your vote.
Walter Rathenau, a German politician in 1909, said that 300 men, all of whom know one another, guide the economic destinies of the continent and seek their successors from their own inner circles. Walter Rathenau was assassinated in 1922. 4 years later, Arthur Spiridovich, a Russian general in the Bolshevik Revolution and member of the papal nobility, took the words of Walter Rathenau and associated them with Jews by including text from the learned protocols of the Elders of Zion, along with Rathenau's writing and his own words in a book entitled The Secret World Government or Hidden Hand, where he wrote that the group may also be known as a hidden hand, which is headed by the Rothschild family of international financiers and based loosely around many of the top national banking institutions and royal families of the world. Now, when going back and actually reading this German text for yourself, we see that Rathenau was sorrowful and heartbroken at the oligarchic implications of this statement, but he did not suggest that the 300 men were Jewish. Nevertheless, after he was killed, his assassins explicitly cited his membership in the 300 Elders of Zion as justification for his killing. This led to the idea that the Rothschild family controls the world, a theory that was further popularized after World War II, the Holocaust, and the creation of a Jewish state.
When a lot of people talk about the Rothschilds, they make them out to be this all-powerful group that control all governments and they control the whole of the banking system. People elevate them to a position they don't have. But there are many other bloodlines that you don't hear about simply because they're not Jews.
See, the Rothschilds were first employed by the House of Hesse.
For instance, the Knights of Malta and also the Franco-Neapolitan branch of the Constantinian Order.
And Sir Evelyn D. Rothschild is the personal financial advisor of Queen Elizabeth II. She knighted him in 1989 for his services to banking and finance.
Under the power of the British Crown, they are Knights of the British Empire.
The Rothschilds gained the status of Swiss nobility under the House of Habsburg, who have claimed to the title of King of Jerusalem. The Habsburg family have a history of employing Jewish bankers to manage their banks.
They are papal and royal knights.
Now let's just consider where the country of Israel was created. The United Nations in Switzerland.
Switzerland. They never get brought up, and they are just like at the top of the motherfucking food chain. It doesn't, like, I don't have to be a genius to figure this shit out.
And let's consider how the United Nations itself began. Before the UN was the League of Nations, and before that, in 1867, the Congress of Peace in Geneva, known as the International League of Peace and Liberty, held a conference that decided to abolish the sovereignty and international relations of the Holy Roman Empire, something Pope Pius blamed on secret societies.
No Geneva Convention, peace treaty will be safe when the elite make a one world government police state.
In 1914, Italy remained neutral despite the Triple Alliance with Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Italy joined the Allies to gain the territories promised to them in the secret Treaty of London. Vittorio Emanuele Orlando tried to obtain full implementation of the Treaty of London as agreed by France and Britain before the war. Emanuele was ultimately forced to abandon the conference and resign his position. Now, Vittorio was a controversial figure. Some authors criticized the blunt way he represented Italy at the conference. Other authors say that, quote, he was connected to mafioso from the beginning to end of his long parliamentary career, but no one ever investigated it. And Vittorio actually stated in the Italian Senate, if by the word mafia we understand a sense of honor pitched in the highest key, a refusal to tolerate anyone's prominence or overbearing behavior, a generosity of spirit which, while it meets strength head-on, is indulgent to the weak, loyalty to friends, if such feeling and such behavior are what people mean by the mafia, then we are actually speaking of the special characteristics of the Sicilian soul. And I declare that I am mafioso and proud to be one. So we see historically that Italian organized crime was already infiltrating the early predecessors of the United Nations. And in fact, the dismantling of the Holy Roman Empire was something the popes and other people were blaming on secret societies.
Illuminated lineage of lonely chromosomes, known for seeking the return of the Holy Roman throne.
Quote, our ultimate end is that of Voltaire and of the French Revolution, the final destruction of Catholicism and even of the Christian idea. The Pope, whoever he is, will never come to the secret societies. It is up to the secret societies to take the first step toward the church, with the aim of conquering both of them. The task that we are going to undertake is not the work of a day, or of a month, or of a year. It may last several years, perhaps a century, but in our ranks, the soldier dies and the struggle goes on. This is Licio Celli, Italian politician, financier, former Nazi liaison, and venerable master of the clandestine Propaganda du Masonic Lodge that was expelled from the Grand Orient of Italy's Masonic organization. When Licio's villa was raided by the police, they discovered a list of almost 1,000 members of the illegal lodge, which contained the names of 3 prime ministers, 43 members of parliament, 43 generals, 8 admirals, secret service chiefs, hundreds of top bureaucrats and diplomats, the police commanders of Italy's 4 largest cities, industrialists and bankers, the editors and publishers of newspapers, and at least 24 journalists and TV personalities. Now, this list is still very relevant considering that the names and the surnames contained inside still include some of the most important people today. Aside from politicians and other important figures, there are several members of organized crime associated with the P2 Masonic Lodge. What does organized crime have in common with Freemasonry and secret societies? Well, aside from the initiation rituals and sacred blood oaths, the connections between secret societies and the mafia have been well documented by the Anti-Mafia Parliamentary Commission. Quote, the committee feels that the link between Cosa Nostra and institutions is mostly through Freemasonry. In fact, while searching this document, over 300 pages relating to Cosa Nostra, the Italian word for Freemasonry comes up 104 times. Masonic, 69 times. The fundamental terrain on which the link between Cosa Nostra with public officials and private professions was created and reinforced is Freemasonry. The Masonic bond serves to keep the relationship continuous and organic. The admission of members of Cosa Nostra, even at high levels in Masonry, is not an occasional or episodical one, but a strategic choice. Masonic affiliations offer the mafia organization a formidable tool to extend its power to obtain favors and privileges in every field. Cosa Nostra establishes relationships with sectors or individual exponents of the political system. The mafia is organic to this political class. It itself is divided into a blatant and occult structure. In all the investigations, even the most recent, involving politicians and public officials, arms and drug trafficking, emerge characters linked to Cosa Nostra and other mafia-style criminal organizations, Masonic lodges, and centers of occult power.
The people that we have arrested today include mayors, deputy mayors, New Jersey state assemblymen, city councilmen, city council candidates, and a variety of other public officials ranging from commissioners to regulatory inspectors, and of course, a number of rabbis from the Jewish community. This case uncovered a web of corruption that spanned the state, similar to the way a spider's web might cover your face if you accidentally walk into it.
More recently, a UCLA professor in spring of 2020 said that over the past 6 years or so, several initiatives have sought to expand the reach of the Anti-Mafia Criminal Justice Project beyond the realm of criminal organizations. Specifically, several legislative and political initiatives, a new approach to the political potential of deviated Freemasonic lodges. It should be clear by now that there exists a real-life, occult, and hidden structure composed of civilians and military men. A secret organization with a network of communications, arms, and explosives, and men trained to use them. This constitutes a complex, articulated, and fluctuating apparatus of conspiracies that crosses the boundaries of black or red ideological matrices created over the centuries with devilishly constructed plots between the state, intelligence, Freemasonry, mafia, and terrorist groups. We are faced with very refined minds that they try to guide certain actions of the mafia. There are perhaps points of connection between the leaders of Cosa Nostra and occult centers of power that have other interests. Nothing but the trenched troops of an occult army remotely controlled by exponents of the state apparatus and heavily linked to the American CIA. The former Prime Minister of Italy is another very powerful man and is related to the Forza and Visconti families. Here is their family crest. In 2002, the Italian monarch ban was lifted and the House of Savoy head Vittorio Emanuele was briefly allowed to enter Italy. His lightning-fast visit caught Italian journalists on the hop and ruffled diplomatic feathers since his true destination was the tiny Vatican state. Dressed in a dark suit and a black tie, Vittorio Emanuele stooped to kiss the Pope's ring at the start of their brief meeting in the Vatican. Now, it's curious after all these years of exile that he would choose to visit the Vatican. And it's even more interesting that he would have a meeting and exchange of gifts with the Pope. Now, this is something we've seen before, but it's usually with, heads of state. But then again, this Pope was involved in the Banco Imbrasiano scandal. This Pope received a warning letter stating that such a forthcoming event would provoke a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions in which the church will suffer the gravest damage. Now that letter was sent by Roberto Calvin. Remember God's banker? The member list of P2 did not include any Catholic clergy, only laypersons working for the Vatican as bankers and financial advisors. How much any high-level church official knew about the money laundering schemes is not quite clear. The connections of their bankers to the mafia, to weapon smugglers, and false flag terrorists was allegedly not known by church officials.
It created an offshore bank in the center of the Vatican, in the center of Rome. And for Italians who had money, this was very enticing because here's Vatican City, and there's Rome right around it. There's no wall between the two, and it meant that if you were standing in Rome and you had $1 million in cash and you didn't want Italian authorities to know about it, or you were mobsters and didn't want prosecutors chasing it, you just had to find a priest who was a friend or the family to deposit it into a Vatican bank account, and the minute it went in there, it disappeared and nobody could find it.
Pope Benedict. For the first time in 600 years, the Pope stepped down to give the role to Pope Francis, the first Pope who is also a member of the Jesuit order.
The House of Farnese established the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits. Luigi Fortis institutionalized a Jesuit plan of education into colleges in Europe, Canada, and the United States. Union College established Kappa Alpha, the first fraternity. Since 1795, 19 U.S. presidents have attended this school, and 2 years after the birth of Kappa Alpha, Sigma Phi, and Delta Phi were established. This triad referred to themselves as fraternities, which derives from the Latin word frater, meaning brother. More than 3/4 of the United States senators are fraternity men, and 40 out of the 47 United States Supreme Court justices are fraternity men. All but 2 U.S. presidents and U.S. vice presidents have been fraternity men.
United States policymakers for the 2020 and 2021 pandemic have all been Jesuit educated.
The power of a Jesuit education is the integration, I believe, of the intellectual, the religious, the social, and the affective dimensions of people's lives.
Now, President Trump appointed Robert Redfield as director of the CDC in 2018. The first confirmed case of COVID-19 was discovered in the United States on January 20th, 2020, while Redfield was serving as the CDC director. Redfield was a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force from its start on January 29, 2020. When he was appointed, the Center for Science and the Public Interest released a statement urging the administration against naming him to the post, claiming a lack of experience in leading a public health agency, a long history of scientific misconduct, and an extreme religious agenda. Extreme religious agenda? Robert Redfield attended Georgetown University. Georgetown University is a private Jesuit research university in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Now, while producing this documentary, the word Jesuit was removed from the first sentence of this Georgetown Wikipedia page. Georgetown is the oldest Catholic university in America, officially established as a college in 1789. In fact, Georgetown was actually established in America by the Jesuits many decades before the country itself was even founded. Jesuit settlers founded the province of Maryland in 1634. It is the closest academic medical center in proximity to the National Institutes of Health. In fact, Georgetown and the NIH offer a combined PhD program in biomedical research. Georgetown University partnered with the Frederick National Laboratory and Leidos to launch a distinguished lecture series in 2021, as well as a joint research and education collaboration. There were more than 20 Georgetown alumni serving in Congress during the year of 2020, as well as the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. Next, we have Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci's grandparents immigrated to the United States from Italy. Fauci grew up Catholic, but now considers himself a humanist. Fauci is a technocrat and a Jesuit. He attended Regis High School, a private Jesuit school in Manhattan, and then got his bachelor's at the College of the Holy Cross, another private Jesuit institution. In 2020, Fauci was interviewed on how his Jesuit education prepared him for his role in the pandemic. CEO of Abbott Labs went to Boston College.
Boston College is distinctive in one very particular way. It's Jesuit.
Several members of Congress attended Boston College, along with news columnists, television professionals, executive producers, NBC correspondents, Associated Press editors, the judge at the Rittenhouse trial, the chairman of State Street Corporation. Next on our Jesuitical list of policymakers is Andrew Cuomo, who graduated Fordham University. Fordham University held a conference with all three major former intelligence heads, which were also all Jesuit educated. Did you know that Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, began his Jesuit education at a very young age? Speaking of Bavaria, Donald Trump is Jesuit educated too. He spent 2 years at Fordham University. In fact, Donald Trump's paternal grandfather was Frederick Trump from the Kingdom of Bavaria in the village of Kallstadt during the Holy Roman Empire. He is related to Henry Hines, who was the grandson of Charlotte Louisa Trump from the same region. This is David D. Rothschild, former chairman of NM Rothschild & Sons, where Wilbur Ross worked for 25 years, including when he met Trump in the 80s and saved his casinos from bankruptcy. Ross also advised the mayor of New York City, Sir Rudy Giuliani. But don't worry, he quit working for the Rothschilds when he was put in the White House by Donald Trump in 2016. Now, isn't it interesting that another Italian member of papal nobility would become the first conspiracy theorist and the man who popularized the Rothschild runs the world theory?
A lot of people say the Rothschilds control the New World Order, they control the One World Government. They don't. Really, there are also other banking bloodlines. You have the Medici, you have the Breakspear, Orsini, Farnese. These are from Rome. These are Italian papal bloodlines. They're part of what's called the black nobility.
The black nobility, so this idea of these supreme dynasties that go beyond even what we know as in Europe. We still have royal families. So black nobility would be people like the Orsinis and people like that who are above even what we would consider to be royal families in Europe.
This is what runs the world, not the governments. The governments are run by these powerful families and their oligarchical connections.
who control the Washington Post. They control the New York Times. They control the 3 TV networks.
You see, the Rothschilds became part of black nobility when David D. Rothschild married Princess Olympia Aldo Brandini. In fact, James Mayer de Rothschild made loans to the Vatican, and these loans were overseen by the Torlonia family, an Italian noble family from Rome who acquired a huge fortune in the 18th and 19th centuries through administering the finances of the Vatican. You see, historically the Romans felt that the Jews were good with finances. Karl Rothschild received the ribbon and star from the Sacred Military Constantinian Order of St. George.
They're just Vatican Knights of Rome.
It was customary for Catholics to kiss the Pope's feet when meeting him. Being a Jew, Rothschild was permitted to simply kiss the ring on his hand instead.
Coming right in. Watch out. That's right. Hey, sorry. Not you either. Well, we're all just going to keep doing this.
Now, Princess Olympia Aldo Brandini is also a non-linear descendant of Napoleon on her mother's side, before she married into the Rothschild family. So this is the princely family, which is currently represented by Prince Camillo Aldo Brandini, whose heir is Don Clemente Aldo Brandini. The Doria, Pamphilj, Landi, and Aldo Brandini families have all become united through marriage and descent under the simplified surname Doria Pamphilj. The family lives on through a branch of the Borghese family, leading member of the soi disant black nobility. The Borghese banking family is a princely family of Italian noble and papal background. They were one of the leading families of the black nobility and maintain close ties to the Vatican. The Borghese family married into the Torlonia family. The Torlonias are believed to be worth over $2 billion in assets, not counting their personal wealth and offshore wealth from mafia profits. It's alleged that the Torlonia family are overseeing the United States Treasury through Rome's network of power and also oversee private Swiss bank accounts of the Italian nobility. Now, if you look at the US Treasury, it's actually designed just like the Torlonia Villa in Rome. The family is overseeing the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland.
The central bank of central banks.
I need a dollar, that's what I need. Hey, hey. Well, I need a dollar, that's what I need. Hey, hey.
You can take that all the way back to the Venetian moneylenders.
The King of England repudiated his debts to the houses of Bardi and Peruzzi. They were key bankers of the period who had looted every part of Europe through this bank. It's very much like the IMF conditionalities today. As a matter of fact, the IMF conditionalities are a repetition, a continuation of the Venetian tradition. They are evil. The people who run the IMF are evil. The bureaucrats of the IMF as a collectivity are purely evil. They are mass murderers.
In 1666, the House of Habsburg created the cryptic formula AEIOU, which is an enigma that has occupied generations of historians. More than 300 interpretations have emerged, ranging from the gravity of state concerns to contemptuous malice, from scholarly humanist allusions to occult decryptions. The current accepted translation is, "All the earth is subject to Austria." According to Habsburger.net, the assumption that Frederick's AEIOU device aimed to express the claim of universal power dates back to the 17th century, when the Habsburgs really had become a great power and were reveling in Baroque symbolism. AEIOU. All the earth is subject to Austria. Remember, Austria is where the IIASA helped create the Limits to Growth document with the Club of Rome, which in turn created the current consensus for climate change. And Austria isn't the only country to lock down their unvaccinated citizens. Others have followed. Now, this German dynastic House of Habsburg still exists today and owns the Order of the Golden Fleece and the Imperial and Royal Order of St. George. The family is a member of black nobility. The current head of the family is Karl von Habsburg. The Pictet Group, a private Swiss banking and member of the Global Footprint Network we discussed earlier, as well as the WWF, which was founded by the Hoffmann-La Roche family. and who also had to apologize for making this disgusting ad. The WWF was founded by Godfrey Rockefeller, Julian Huxley, Prince Bernard of the Netherlands, a member of the Nazi Party and co-founder of the Bilderberg Group.
Prince Bernard of the Netherlands left some evidence, and the Bilderberg shows our presidents ever since.
The WWF is also located in Switzerland. The Vatican and Swiss cantons have been in contract for centuries.
They were known for their loyalty to their employers, and the Swiss Guard is still responsible for the security of the Vatican City and of the Pope himself.
Rome. Here you find an extension of Switzerland that's symbolic the world over. Do you know that Swiss soldiers in traditional uniform guard the Pope in the Vatican?
Do you remember the Gotthard Tunnel opening ceremony and ritual in Switzerland? Who is this in the audience? First, we see the portrayal of miners as zombie-like pawns prone to frenzy and rhythmic obedience. These miners end up stripping and dancing with pagan animal and bush spirits, eventually engaging in mindless simulated orgies. There are various symbols of Swiss national pride woven throughout the production, but the focus is clearly on the miners and doll-like citizens' interactions with the pagan gods and priests. Eventually, a goat demon resembling the ancient Baphomet emerges from the tunnel and proceeds to mock a carried lamb. The play graphically depicts miners dying as sacrifices to the goat demon. The goat demon ends up mounting and mating with the spirits of the dead miners, as well as receiving their worship. The goat is robed in white. He dies and resurrects as a red-cloaked woman giving birth to empty-faced dancing dolls. Now keep in mind that 9 miners actually died during the construction of this tunnel. A winged creature wearing a horrific mask descends from the ceiling, meant to symbolize workers who died in the construction of the tunnel. 3 workers hang from the ceiling as if dead. And who do we see in the audience of this $9 million production? A congregation of EU delegates and other major politicians, including then French President Francois Hollande, Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, and German President Angela Merkel. We see heads of state give a standing ovation to a ceremony in which actual miners' deaths are commemorated as necessary sacrifices for the completion of their grand public works project. These miners were human beings, and they're being depicted as mindless sacrifices mated by ancestral pagan gods of the Gotthard region. Applauded by standing global bureaucrats, CEOs, bankers, and prime ministers.
Now you know that Switzerland is more than chocolate and cheese.